Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. Very excited for today's guest. It's a first-timer, and in the spirit of our ongoing effort to counter-program against the news of the week, we figured we'd sort of go back to the beginning of, Judeo-Christian civilization. And so we have Dr. Tomer Persico, correct? Persico?
Yeah. Persico.
Persico.
Yeah.
Okay. I keep wanting to say Prosecco like the booze, but anyway, Tomer Persico is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute and chief editor of the Challenges of Democracy book series for the Rubinstein Center at Reichman University.
Indeed.
And he has a much longer bio with very impressive things like correct visiting assistant professor at UC Berkeley Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. He's contributed to many great journals. We're not going to go into all of it. We'll have his full bio in the show notes. And he is the author of a book that first came out in Hebrew, but is now finally out in English, and I've been going through it as best I can. We booked this fairly late in the process, so I haven't finished the whole thing. And it's In God's Image, How Western Civilization Was Shaped by a Revolutionary Idea. Professor Persico, welcome to the Remnant.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonah. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I apologize if I'm a little out of it. I just returned from the vet where we were told they're probably going to pull all of my dog's remaining teeth, and that was a little stressful, but we'll leave that for another time. Okay, so you're a first-timer here. My rule on this podcast is I like to ask people the one question I always wish people would ask me when I'm on a book tour.
Let's go.
What's your book about?
It's about a revolutionary idea that shaped the West, obviously. It's actually about the idea of the image of God and its influence. And when I began to research it, I was quite surprised that no book was written about it. I mean, it was obvious to me that someone, of course, wrote about how this idea that stars in the first chapter of Genesis influenced the Western culture, our culture. Obviously, somebody wrote about it, but no, there's no monography that stretches out into the past, and what I try to do shows the cultural and intellectual development of ideas that we hold dear today, rooted in the image of God, the idea that all people were created in the image of God.
So I want to flesh that out in a second, but just thinking about that it is weird sometimes how you discover no one's written a book about this thing that everybody thinks everybody's written lots of books about. But is it possible that some of this idea is captured in sort of the history, books about the history of equality, right? Or the history of individualism.
Or human rights.
Or human rights, because that's a big part of your thesis, is that human rights, individualism, equality, they basically, the seed stock, the acorn for all of those ideas is this idea that we were created in the image of God, right?
Right. No, so of course this appears in some books about equality, about human rights, about rights discourse, about liberalism, but I wanted to take it a lot further back. And I think really everything hinges on what you said in a word, individualism, because really the idea of human rights, the idea of equality is something to do with us perceiving ourselves as individuals, and as individuals as autonomous, as beings who want to do things that they aspire to do and have to be given a permission to do so. And so I wanted to go way back to a point in which humans were not individuals, didn't perceive themselves as individuals. And this, I think, is the hinge point in which we must begin, in which the image of God really gave this certain new way of grasping the human person.
So let's talk about the prehistory of this, right? So what was it like before this idea? I mean, you get into it in the book, but if I talk to a normal fairly well-read person and say, it's really it's the Jews who. I mean, I know that it's not just the Jews, but it comes out of the biblical tradition. It takes root out of the biblical tradition. This idea of people were created in the image of God,
Yeah.
and a lot of people would say, "Well, wait a second. I remember reading in Greek mythology or Roman mythology, or weren't humans created by gods, and don't the gods look like humans? Like,
Yeah.
what was the prevailing attitude prior to this, and why was it revolutionary for it to
So yes,
take
you've
on?"
got genealogical myths that say that humans were created out of the body of God or out of the body of some monster by another god that vanquished that monster, or they look like, of course, the Olympian gods. And I would even say further, there are stories like even the Epic of Gilgamesh, a very famous myth from Mesopotamia, 2000 BCE, etc., that mentions people created in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
So even that idea was actually not invented or developed by the Bible, by the Jewish or ancient Hebrew tradition. But what the Bible does is, first of all, mention that people were created in the image of God, and it mentions that all people were created in the image of God. That's the novelty here, because you can have a hero here or a king
Right.
there that's created in the image of God, and of course, the image of God is what makes that person a hero or legitimizes that king's reign, because, of course, they were created in the image of God and others weren't. But the Bible is the only place that you have all humans created in the image of God. Now, if you notice, immediately the Bible also says, because humans were created in the image of God, they have dominion over the animals, over the fish, etc. Why? Because the fish and the animals weren't created in the image of God. And because humans were created in the image of God, they are significant. So their story is worth telling. Just like Gilgamesh's story is worth telling because he was created in the image of God. But the great novelty of the Bible is, of course, that it roots this inherent equality between all people and the inherent significance of each and every person. That's the two major things that come with being created in the image of God. Now you asked,
So, yep.
yeah,
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, you asked what was before. I think it's hard for us to imagine a world in which we are not individuals, right? Like, if anybody who goes to the humanities in university will hear, courses or sessions about the rise of the modern individual, the rise of the modern subject. But what really is not being an individual? What is it like not being an individual? And what I try to show is that, of course, was the normal position, the normal existence of most people in the ancient world. And what it means is that you don't carry yourself around as a separate being. You are recognized by others, and you recognize yourself as being part of a long net of relations. You are someone's son or daughter, you are married to someone, you are someone's father. We see this in surnames of till today of Semitic people. We're called, like, let's say I'm Tomer. I'm called Tomer, son of Michael. Tomer, son of David. Right? Because people were in a mesh of relationships, and this also has um, legalistic meaning. It has judicial meaning. It means that if someone of your tribe or of your house does some sin, does some malice to some other house or tribe, your whole tribe, your whole house will be punished, or will be judged for that misdeed. So there's no individual uh, autonomy, there's no individual agency, there's no individual accountability, and you yourself don't perceive yourself as a separate being, a monad that can just up and go if they so like, and move to Berlin and become a waiter in whatever. Right? There's no such thing. You're meshed in the network of your relationships, and the idea of the image of God, the idea that you are specifically, you yourself are special, equal to all others, and have some inner sacred essence, begins to change that.
Right. So, like, I mean, as you've talked about, the Hammurabi Code says that
Right.
if I'm building a house and the roof caves in and kills
You're
somebody's
executed.
son, then uh, my son will be executed rather than
Right.
necessarily me, right? Because you want to visit the same collective pain that visited
Also,
upon someone else.
I mean, and so you can find dozens of such laws
Sure.
that if you kill a member of a family, your own, you know, parallel member of your family gets killed, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's, of course, it's the sort of measure for measure logic that we find in ancient laws and even till today sometimes. But it also means that your son, if your son is killed, or daughter, or wife, or whatever, isn't considered wholly a person,
Right.
isn't considered a separate subject, a legal subject, or a subject at all. Because if they were not be punished for the malice of another person,
Yeah.
right?
So it's funny. One of the running themes on here is I hate analogies to nation states as organic entities, as bodies, right? Woodrow Wilson was very into this. There are lots of people. It's a very medieval thing, right? The body politic, the corpus mysticum, all that kind of stuff. And my problem with it is it first of all, it completely negates our system of checks and balances and constitutional order to say that all the parts of the body need to be moving in tandem. But it's also just sort of fundamentally illiberal. And I hadn't really thought about it until this conversation that you can see it if you think of a tribe or a family or a dynasty or a group as an organic body politic,
Mm-hmm.
then a son for a son makes sense because it's just the extrapolation of an eye for an eye, right? It's
Right.
like these people are appendages of one being, which is this collective group,
Exactly.
and the same way that my thumb is a appendage of my personal body.
Right. And just as in organic nation states, of course, there's the head of the state who is, you know, the leader who channels the will of the people, etc., with
Right.
fascism, etc. Just like that, your house has the paterfamilias, has the patriarch, which is considered really the only legal subject
Mm-hmm.
in the house, right? And everybody else is either their property, his property, really, not there, right? Or his organs. So
Right.
if you cut off the son of another patriarch, your son gets cut off from you, just as someone will poke out an eye for an eye or an
Right.
arm for an arm, right?
Right.
It's the same logic. These people are simply not humans in their own right. And really, you get only in Deuteronomy, only in the Bible and in Genesis, you will get explicit laws that say sons will not be killed for their father's sins,
Mm-hmm.
and fathers will not be killed for their sons' sins. Each die for their own sins. This is the revolution of Deuteronomy, of the Bible, right, of the Torah, which says, which explicitly argues with Hammurabi laws, with Assyrian laws, with the whole of Mesopotamian culture, and says this can't work because we think of people in a different way. We think each and every person is a whole human in their own right, is an individual, and so is a legal subject in their own right. That's the revolution that begins over there.
So I've often argued that prior to monotheism, gods were they were essentially they weren't so much servants as contractors, right? You pay a certain fee, you get good crops, right?
Yeah.
And it was a transactional relationship, and you tried to placate or reward or bribe the god that you needed for war or for agriculture or for
Yeah.
this for fertility, that kind of stuff. And so the really revolutionary thing was monotheism, which says no, it's just there's just one God, and he doesn't work for you; you work for him. And
Right.
I'm curious, could you have a successful? Could the way you're describing the image of God, this concept of being made in the image of God, can it work without monotheism?
I want to complicate the picture you drew
Uh huh.
because, yes, you work for God, but God also reciprocates.
Mm-hmm.
There's a covenant.
Right.
Really,
Fair.
what the
Fair. Fair.
image
Fair.
of God does is allow you to be a side in an actual relationship with the divine, right? Because if you're only a lowly like piece of flesh with the Olympian gods, they couldn't care less about your faith. They're playing around actually with you,
Right.
running armies one into the other as their whims or as their playthings, etc. When you have the image of God, when you are created in the image of God, then you are in a position to actually have a serious relationship with God, a covenant. And in
Right.
that covenant, of course, you owe God more than God owes you, but it is reciprocal. God will say, I mean, there are a few voices in the Bible that you can discern. There are voices that say God is completely transcendent, simply obey the rules, that's it, right? And, have yourself commit to that, to be the servant of God, that's it. But there are voices in the Bible that says, if you obey my laws, I will take care that rain will fall in the proper time, and I will take care of your crops and your cattle, etc. This is a reciprocal relationship, and I think this is the what the image of God and what monotheism allows for, this sort of even intimate relationship. And God will say, I love my people, right? I love these lowly creatures because I created them, and I have a covenant with them.
So it's a fair point about the covenant. I hadn't thought about that in advance. But in the Hebrew Bible, the image of God, the likeness, it's a physical thing, right? It is less
Right.
a divine spark thing. Can you just sort of explain that for a second? Because I
That's
think it's
right. So,
important
I mean,
when we get to Paul to set that up.
exactly. I mean, we talk about the image of God, but of course, the image of God can be a lot of things. It can be the soul, it can be conscience, it can be the will, it can be the intellect, the reason. But for the Bible, and even for the Talmud, even for the sages in the first centuries AD, even they would say the image of God is the actual contour, the actual physical form of the body. And there are many proofs you can bring for that from the Bible and from the Talmud, as simply this is the way these people thought. Now they do that also as part of that relationship. The person is the image of God. Image in it's a negative word in the Bible, but it's a sort of an idol, because the person has or brings down the presence of the divine. Because the person is in the shape of God, it is as if there's an idol in a temple, and that idol not only represents, but actually presents God, actually is the presence of the divine. And humans, for the Bible and for the Talmud, are the presence of the divine, and it has to do with being in the same form. What happens later, and you mentioned Paul, what happens later is that the image of God becomes internalized with Paul, who was very much influenced by Hellenistic culture, of course. And then all through the history of Christianity, the image of God becomes many different things, as I said, conscience or soul, etc.
Yeah.
I
So
will say though, if we can go back to
yeah.
the covenant. By the way, if you are looking for a religion that minimizes the relationship between humans and God, it's Islam.
Mm-hmm.
In Islam, the meaning of the word Islam is surrender or
Submission, right?
submission, etc.
Yeah.
Right? And indeed, if you look at the Quran in the genealogical myth of the creation of humans in the Quran, there is no image of God.
Mm-hmm.
There is no image of God for good theological reasons, because Muslims want God to be as different, as transcendent, as abstract as possible, no form, no relationship in any way with humans. And if so, humans can't be in the image of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are very lowly creatures, and they don't have that sort of covenant that they do have in Judaism and Christianity.
That explains a little bit why Islam takes the no graven images and
Yeah.
no idolatry stuff so
It's
much more
very serious
seriously.
about this theology,
Yeah.
though. Again, it has a price. The price is humans are relegated to being very lowly creatures, and for me as a Jew, I cherish the the theology that allows me to create a very real, I feel, intimate relationship with the divine, because I'm not the divine's equal, obviously, far from it, but there is something in me that allows me for this relationship.
So it's not really a digression, but it's a point of just curiosity for me. If the image of God is more literal in the Hebrew Bible, right? It's like literally we look like God, or God looks like us, or however you want to put it. And it's Paul who introduces the idea that the image of God is more of a spiritual thing. It's a divine spark. It's the soul, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What is the Hebrew conception, the pre-Christian Hebrew conception of the soul?
There's no conception of the soul as we think of a soul. There's a conception of ruach, spirit, which is really the energy that makes people run, right? When that energy is spent, you're dead. But it's not you. You are the body. Think of it. Is there any sense in wishing for a resurrection of the body in the end of times if we're not the body? If we're separate souls, and after we die, if we're good, we're in heaven, we're sitting in the right side of God, we're enjoying the bliss of, whatever, the beatific vision or whatever, what's the sense of returning to the body? The very idea of the resurrection of the dead in the end of times, this Talmudic, it's a, in the Bible it's not really even there, but it's a Talmudic idea. The very idea means that you're the body, right? It means that the body is important, and really you need to be alive, so the body needs to be alive. Or give up the spirit, right? Give up the spirit is actually a translation from the Hebrew meaning to die, right? There's a Hebrew saying. And who gives up the spirit? You. Who is you? The body, right? So when you give up the spirit, you're the body, you're dead. The spirit is what animated you. And because you gave it up, you're dead, right? My God, into your arms I commend my spirit. Who says this? Jesus on the cross. Why does he say it? Because he's the body, and he commends his spirit to God. Now later it gets translated, or it gets interpreted into being a separate soul and something that is eternal, something that goes up to heaven. But these are all interpreted like Christian understandings of this, which entered Judaism. Certainly Judaism today believes in this wholly, because we're far from the Talmudic and biblical understanding of the image of God or of the human person. But it comes to Judaism only in the 10th century and onwards.
That's be a great subject for a whole other episode. But and there are going to be people I can feel it now are mad at me for moving on. But let's get back to the book. So Paul, in many ways, I was raised Jewish, didn't get a lot of Christian teaching. My first extended introduction to Paul, other than one Bible class, fairly secular Bible class in my high school, was in reading Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is not a big fan of Paul. And I've since rounded out my understanding. I have a better appreciation. But one of the takeaways I really do get from Nietzsche is Paul, in many ways, is the figure who creates Christianity as an institution, as a system. And he's got to be, if you're doing the most important people in the history of the world, he's got to be in the top 10, right? I mean,
I would say in the top 3, if not the most important person ever. I would say, because Paul, it's not only that he creates Christian institutions, he creates Christian theology. He creates Christianity. With all respect to Jesus, and I do, I mean, Jesus has a few miracles, and he tells us a few parables, and he shows us how to turn the other cheek, etc. But Paul has the tough job, 2 tough jobs, really. First, export Judaism to the Gentiles, make Judaism a universal religion with the new covenant that Jesus heralded, etc. And second, yes, institutionalize this, because if for the first few years of Paul's mission, people were sure, he was sure that the kingdom of heaven was, just around the corner, and we just need to tidy up things and get ready for redemption, etc. it soon proved that time is moving, and second coming is actually not quite here, and we need to institutionalize. So that's Paul's job, and he does 4 great circles around the Mediterranean, and he preaches and he writes his letters, and in these letters he creates Christian theology, and he basically creates the Western world. That's why I say he's so important. I mean, he creates the Western person when he internalizes the image of God and makes the image of God something that is in us, that was corrupted with original sin, but that if we embrace Jesus and if we have a metamorphosis, a word that he uses twice, a metamorphosis inside us, this will be able to cleanse us of sin and make us to enter into this holy community of Christians, into a relationship with the divine, and into true liberty, right? Into freedom, the freedom of a Christian that Luther will later expound upon and make a lot of things with, right? Make a lot of creations with. But that's Paul. And I want to read, I think perhaps the most important verse of Paul. It's from Galatians, right? Listen to this. Paul says, and here is his mission. This is his mission: to universalize Judaism, to export Judaism. For ye are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For ye are all one in Christ Jesus. And if ye be Christ's, then are you Abraham's seeds and heirs according to the promise. So the last sentence says, here I am proclaiming to you that you can become Jewish. You can become Abraham's seed, not ethnically, not biologically, but heirs to the promise. Everything that the Jews have been promised, you are now promised. How do you become this? Not by circumcision, not by starting to observe the Sabbath and kosher laws. No. Something that cuts to the chase. You only need to believe, and you only need to be transformed inwardly. That inward transformation, he says in other verses, is the image of God that gets renewed. Okay? And now, the most important thing here, which connects to the later, much later liberal order, right, is that there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female. What Paul does is, by internalizing the image of God and by internalizing the crux of religion, the essence of our relationship with God, everything else becomes peripheral. Your ethnicity, if you're a Jew or a Greek, the Greeks are, of course, a code name for the best Gentiles there is, right? The Greek culture, etc. So doesn't matter your ethnicity. If you're bond or free, doesn't matter your class, doesn't matter your social status. You're a slave, it's okay, doesn't matter. Neither male nor female. Imagine in the first century to say that gender doesn't matter. We are still debating this, right? And Paul says everything else is peripheral to your inner transformation, your inner and your new renewed image, which is in relationship with the divine. And here he really creates what can be called the abstract universal individual. If the image of God in the Bible created individualism, every human being is significant. Every human being is unique, and every human being is equal to every other. So respect, dignity, etc. That's in the Bible. Here, the individual becomes abstract, as in the most important thing for you is your image, is the divine image in you, is the faith in Christ, is the transformation, and that's all internal. So the image of God is privatized and internalized, and everything else, every other characteristic of your life, your ethnicity, etc., gender, etc., is simply secondary. That allows us to see humans first and foremost as humans. Everybody is equal. Ethnicity doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. And you can already hear the logic of liberalism here, that will say many years later, right? Millennia later, it will say you have equal rights no matter your ethnicity, no matter your
Mm-hmm.
gender, no matter your sexual orientation, etc., etc. That's where it begins.
Yeah, no, so I love this point in part because in I'm sure you have some analogous fights in Israel, but in America, I'm a conservative, but I'm fighting all the time with the new right, and part of my problem with the new right in America, depending on who we're talking about, is they're illiberal, and for me, the conservative tradition in America is for defending the the fundamentally liberal ideas of our founding, and what I find sort of fun about this point is that a lot of the people I argue with are constantly decrying, whining, fear mongering about the globalists. And why can't we get back to good old fashioned Christian this and Christian that? And I was like, you do realize like Christianity is the dawn of all globalisms.
Exactly.
It is the mother of globalist ideology in all forms, and it just seems to go completely over their head. And I don't say this is a criticism of Christianity, right? But
Yeah.
like liberal, when we were talking earlier about families, about trading sons for some transgression, to me, that is the logic of identity politics, right? It is basically it's saying that one member of a group is interchangeable with another member of a group. That they don't have
Mhm.
individual autonomy or agency. You're not judging them on their
Right.
actions. You're judging them as, in effect, idols representing a class of people.
Right. They
And what
cease to be
Christian,
individuals and they become
right,
simply part of a group. Right.
right. So,
Exactly. I
like,
mean,
we're going to get the Jews, so we'll kill a conductor or a bank robber. It doesn't matter because they're just all Jews, right? Or all blacks, or all gays, or all this, or all that.
right.
That is a fundamentally illiberal way of seeing things. And you can see
Exactly.
how Christianity creates. So this is the other big fight that you get on the right in America is whether or not liberalism, classical liberalism that we're talking about, um, whether or not it's innate to Western civilization. And I would say it's inextricable from Western. There isn't a thing called Western civilization
Exactly.
without this liberal tradition in it.
Exactly. Without individualism, without autonomy, without this understanding of an inner dignity, worth, image, however you want to call it, soul, without this, this is why also I think there is a Judeo-Christian tradition. Many people oppose this expression, but I think that what runs across Judaism and Christianity is exactly that, the emphasis on the individual, the emphasis on agency, on autonomy, and then the emphasis on rights. This runs through that whole culture and whole tradition. And indeed, I can't imagine the West without it. And by the way, people who are illiberal have criticism against Christianity. I mean, if you have a serious thinker, you mentioned Nietzsche before,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a serious thinker that doesn't like liberalism, they will single out Christianity and try to break Christianity. So it's Nietzsche, it's George Sorel, it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
fathers of fascism. It's any because they recognize, they understand that Christianity is the universalizer. Christianity is the individualizer. So everything that liberalism, the liberal simply comes out of Christendom, right? I'm not
Right.
saying it's deterministic. I'm not saying, obviously Christian countries can be illiberal, like let's say today's Russia, etc., which probably never was very liberal. But in the right conditions, Christianity will form a liberal order, and it's genetically, the same family.
Yeah. So it's fortuitous that you mentioned Russia, right? Because Russia, in part because I just love the word. So I always loved the word Caesaro-papism or Caesaro-popism,
Mhm.
and so the Russian Orthodox tradition does not recognize what I was going to ask you about. The classic sort of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's,
Exactly.
the division of church and state, the city of God, city of man, in Augustinian terms. So, like, if you go to the Kremlin, the the headquarters, the Vatican of Russian Orthodox Church is inside the walls
Oh,
of the Kremlin to
I actually
symbolize that
didn't know that.
the unity of the two, and the czar was the head of the church. He had spiritual
Right.
authority and secular authority. And in the West, which is the Western tradition of liberalism, you start
Yeah.
seeing very early on the separation of these. And so
Yeah.
the question I have for you is that separation, right? The city of God and city of man stuff that you get out of Augustine, is that inevitable? Is that a byproduct of this idea of we're created in the image of God? Or is it a parallel causality kind of thing?
No, I don't think it's inevitable, and I mean, that's really one contribution that we can give to Jesus. I mean, his saying, "Render unto
Right.
Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God," is one of the most significant sentences ever uttered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it led the church on the path that will culminate in the separation of religion and state. Not only that, I mean, Christianity is fit for separation of religion and state because it holds religion as a private, internal, intimate thing. You know, you can compare it to Judaism. For Judaism, religion is always communal. If you,
Mm-hmm.
you pray in a minyan, 10 people at least, etc. So there are differences in the characteristics, and Christianity really affords this, or even, you know, really complements the separation of church and state. But it's not inevitable. By the way, and again, I'm not saying anything is deterministic. I'm not saying that if you plant the seed
Right.
of the image of God in some culture, 3,000 years later, you'll get the liberal order. Really not, right? I mean, the image of God itself is not a sufficient condition for the liberal order. It might be a necessary condition.
Right.
That's what I would say.
It's conducive. It facilitates it, but it doesn't guarantee it.
Yeah, it doesn't guarantee. But I don't know if we can find the liberal order without that idea.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Of course, we don't have enough Earths to have a control group and, you know, and see and experiment that way. But as far as we know, the liberal order did not develop in any culture that is not Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Tom Holland's book Dominion, and one of the points that I get into arguments with people about is there are a lot. Oh, before I get to that, I agree with you. Just one example of why the contingency thing is important. I'm not sure you get Western civilization as we're talking about it, but for the fall of Rome, and so in the Eastern Roman Empire, you still have you then have secular authority as it is over there, but the religious authority stays in Rome, and so you get that physical separation that allows for the interplay of secular authority and state and religious authority, which I think is hugely
many
important.
conditions. I mean, the Protestant Revolution is obviously instrumental in everything we're talking about, because Protestantism multiplied the emphasis on the individual, on your own rendition of the message of the gospel, on your reading of the Bible. You don't need any intermediaries. You don't need the church. You don't need the Pope. You yourself can. All that emphasis again on individualism, autonomy, agency that Martin Luther and Calvin brought is also instrumental in all this, right?
And also, you don't get the Protestant Revolution without the printing press, right? So, I mean, my point is, contingency, other factors matter, but the ideas, it's the algorithm that lets this play out, right?
Of course.
Yeah. All right. So since you brought up, we raced ahead to the Protestant Reformation, and I do want to get to contemporary society, but the point I was just going to make is, which will set you up, is I grew up around a lot of atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, all that kind of stuff. And whenever you point out to them that their secular faith is really an extension of Judeo-Christian morality without the spirituality or without the biblicalism or whatever you want to call it, they get very, very, very cross. So why don't we sort of head in that direction? That's a big part of your argument in the starting with the Protestant Revolution or Reformation and how that sets up the situation. You know, that we
you maybe grew up around atheists. I grew up atheist. So, but But yeah, I mean, but what I try to show in the last part of my book is that the same image of God that brought significance, agency, accountability, individualism to the human person, that then brought the independence to interpret the Bible for yourself, that even the beginning of rights discourse in the Middle Ages, already talking about people having dimensions or depth that must be protected. Later, the beginning of liberalism with John Locke, and the beginning of liberal thought, even that we can have some sort of social contract and etc., and a government that protects our rights. That same image of God also led, or was one of the instrumental conditions that led to secularism. Because if you position the most important, vital, potent part of you inside, and this is divine, what you can get, first of all, is like in the Protestant Revolution and later with deism, you can get an inner source of authority. Luther will say in the Diet of Worms, right? Here I am, I can do no other. I cannot retract my counter arguments to the church, my position that the indulgences are nonsense, etc., because my conscience is tied to the word of God. That's a quote, right? Luther's conscience is tied to the word of God, to the scripture as he understands it, and that authority is higher for him than the Pope, than church councils, than all the history of Christian Catholic Church that led to that point. And so again, so you cannot overemphasize the revolutionary potency of that moment, because Luther positions the highest authority of religion inside. Now, he doesn't say I can in myself decide what is good or bad. He's not a modern person. He's still Middle Ages, right? But he does say my interpretation of the Bible is the highest authority.
Mm-hmm.
But from that, the next step is you will have deists like Matthew Tyndall and basically most of the founding fathers of
Mm-hmm.
the US, which will say reason is a gift of God. And we actually don't even need the scriptures in order to understand what God wants from us. We just think, right? God planted in us, in the image of God, God planted within us or made us in the image of God, and the image of God is reason. For them, the image of God was the ability to think straight and decide between good and bad. And so we don't need scripture, and we actually don't need the whole story of Jesus and the miracles and the virgin birth. No, that's, that these are nice stories, but we just need to think straight. And we know from thinking that there is a God, from reasonable. It's just logic. And we know that God is good, and we know that God wants us to be good. And so we just, live our lives with these commandments given to us by our own reason. That's another step forward. But the next step will already be different atheist thinkers in Europe in the 18th and in the 19th century, and certainly in the 20th century, existentialists like Sartre and Camus, which will say, actually, the highest point a person can come to is believing in himself and rejecting all these uh, um, all these comforting illusions like God and like morality that is somewhere in the universe. No, there's nothing there. The world is empty and empty of meaning. We give meaning to the world by our own decree. So Nietzsche, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the step in which you get atheism out of the same individualism and inner certainty and inner agency and autonomy that you get through the whole process, the whole path that the image of God initiated. So the importance of the individual ends up in the individual being the only important thing.
And in some ways, the individual becomes godlike because
Yeah.
the story starts with God investing meaning in humans, and now humans are investing meaning essentially in themselves.
Yeah.
I know you know this stuff, but you leave out, the romanticism, which I'm of a mind. I wrote in my last book that the romantic period, the romantic era, never ended. We just stopped calling it
Mhm.
romanticism, and um, I think we live in profoundly romantic times now. And one of my, it's a recurring theme on here, is I find the invocation of personal authenticity to be atavistic, sort of almost anti-civilizational. This
Yeah.
idea, like, first of all, the way I always think about it is, um, the idea that you should be, that the highest moral truth can be found internally through a rigorous personal inventory, um, is preposterous. First of all, the scholastics had it right when they said that conscience is, the reason why reason is important is so that we can properly form conscience.
Mm.
And what the Judeo-Christian tradition says is that there are external forms of morality that are contrary to our instincts, and the idea that simply indulging our instincts leads you to a higher truth,
Yeah.
I mean, I truly think is preposterous. And the way I always illustrate this is that it is the essence of terrible parenting, right? So, like, if I have never seen a good father or good mother ever say, "Hey, look, um, you got to be
Go with the
true to your,
flow.
you got to be true to yourself. Go with
Yeah.
your instincts. You run with those scissors, right?
Yeah.
um,
If
you
that's what
play
you
you
really
play with
feel
those
like doing,
matches. Yeah,
yeah.
do whatever.
Yeah.
Just if it feels good, do it.
Yeah.
Right. That is the
Yeah.
opposite of good parenting.
Of course. Yeah.
And yet, a lot of the people with the control of the commanding heights of our culture, including increasingly parts of the right, say that as long as you're true to yourself, as long as you're true to your personal truths, whatever the hell those are,
Yeah.
then you're not open to condemnation, criticism, or the rest. And I think
Yeah.
that's just false.
That's another endpoint of an avenue that comes out, that branches out of what we were talking about, right? One
Right.
avenue is the deification of reason, and then you yourself know everything. The logic explains everything, and of course there is no God because it's just not logical, and we just live our lives in this meaningless universe. The other avenue is the romantic avenue, in which you listen to yourself and you try to be, authentic, or spontaneous or creative. All these words, all this ethos, which is a completely modern ethos, right? Our
Right.
forefather, like, never, King David didn't want to be authentic. Thomas Aquinas didn't, want to be special in any way that we talk about today. Yeah, and Charles Taylor wrote about this beautifully in his Ethics of Authenticity. That this indulgence, this self-indulgence, has the illusion that it can create value out of itself, and of course it can't. And even these same people, if they thought this through, would understand that simply saying, I think the highest value, the highest ideal in life is simply sitting on the beach and getting a suntan, right? Even that is, first of all, contingent on where you were born, how you were brought up, your whole culture. But it also is it's a fallacy to think you can actually create this out of yourself without other values
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing or allowing for that, right? It's so yes, I agree that there's a great pursuit of authenticity today, which is misguided because there's no understanding that even the authentic is conditioned by the society that we live in. I mean, in a certain society, let's say, to give a very simple example, to go to the office barefoot is, you can claim that this is authentic, of course, because it's, you're doing the natural thing, and
Right.
etc. And in another culture, to go to the office with a tie is something that is special and unique, and so you can claim it's authentic. You could not claim it's authentic in the Western culture today, because everybody wears a tie to the office and it's just nothing special. That way, you see that authenticity hinges upon being something that is outside of the norm, that is special, that is unique, that is creative, quote unquote, square, yeah, and never simply something that wells up inside you in a spontaneous way that you just exercise your authenticity and express yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge student of Rene Girard, but he makes, I think, a pretty persuasive point that a lot of what passes for rebelliousness or transgressiveness or romantic, authenticity is in fact a kind of conformity, right? It's like the Silicon Valley thing of not wearing a tie and wearing a T-shirt or a hoodie. Well, that becomes the new uniform eventually, and it's really more a way of coding what tribe you're in than it and sort of how every time the Christians picked up something in ancient times, the Jews stopped doing it because they wanted to have that differentiation, right? I remember when my brother passed away years ago. He was married to a Haitian woman, and her family weren't Jewish and didn't know anything about Jewish customs, and they all brought flowers to the funeral. And the rabbi at the time said, he was very sweet about it. He was a real mensch, and he was just like, because clearly they were coming from the right place, right? They just didn't know it was a norm. And he says, "You know who started this? We did. But then the Christians started putting flowers on everybody's graves, so we put rocks on them." And it was a great little lesson.
Exactly.
But
no, exactly. Authenticity is really all about doing something special that is contrary to what everybody is doing. But of course, in a certain culture, let's say Palo Alto, high tech, manosphere, it becomes the new uniform, the new habit that everybody has to agree upon.
And then, like, the way I often think about it is, so what bothers me about this, and I agree with you, it's one of the avenues. It's not the only. I'm pro-liberalism. I'm pro-liberal democratic capitalism, but the sort of Rousseauian, Rawlsian, Foucauldian, whatever, Nietzschean, these cul-de-sacs that came off. What bothers me the most about them is the way in which their boosters, I don't know what the right way to put this, practice bravery on the cheap. They like to say that they are rebelling against conformity and against the system. Property is theft, all these kinds of things. But I guarantee you, if I throw a rock through their window or steal one of their garden statues, they're going to call the cops, right? I mean, like they want all the benefits of Judeo-Christian hard-learned lessons about civilization and order and autonomy and respect. But the post-liberals on the right in America, they want to say that the Constitution is this merely neutral, value-neutral document. And I'm like, wait till you get arrested and you're denied the right to confront your accuser, right? Like, there's some profound moral lessons built into the Constitution.
It's the same people who say defund the police, and when the police is defunded, they hire a guarding agency, because lo and behold, you actually need someone to uphold the law, right? I mean, you don't want people to steal from you, so some people with guns have to be around somewhere, right?
So this the classic version of this comes from libertarian, a certain brand of anarcho-capitalist libertarian that I have a lot of sympathies with in some areas, but they'll try to make this point that the state is violence, or that the state is a criminal organization, and they'll say, look, nothing the state does is without the threat of violence, and then they'll take you through these parade of horribles where they'll say, look, if you don't sort out your garbage, you'll get a ticket, you get a fine, but eventually men with guns will come to your house and make you do something or arrest you. And for me, the response to that is, okay. that's civilization.
No, but exactly the liberal order or liberalism, a state that is liberal, does exactly that. It it constructs, it establishes a whole complex, a framework of laws and of people who enforce the law, but it also brings all sorts of mechanisms that allow for a limit on
Right.
the power of the executive, on the power of the police. That's liberalism. That means
Right.
that if you are arrested, you have due process because you have the right to an attorney and the right to
Right.
a fair trial. That means that your property is protected because this is one of your rights, and your freedom of speech is protected because this is one of your rights. That's the whole liberal idea, saying, yes, we have no choice but to have a state, or else it's the state of nature, and life is nasty, brutish, and short, right? We need a state, but in that state, we will construct such mechanisms that will limit the power of the government and withhold our rights. This is the second passage of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these rights to be as evident. All men are created equal. They were endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And the next sentence is, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Why are we doing why are we establishing a republic? What are we doing here? To secure these rights. That's the idea, right? And if you don't understand that idea, I mean, so either you are a great believer in human nature and you're an anarchist and say, if people would just be let alone, everybody would be lovey-dovey and, harmony would ensue, and etc. Or you can believe that if you want, right? Either that, or you want autocracy, or you want some sort of party or individual to decide for everybody else. But there's no other option.
Yeah, so this takes us back to the conversation we were in the beginning about this idea of the organic body politic, the organicism in political thought. The people who don't like liberalism have what I would argue is a much more reactionary, ancient understanding of politics, right? They think liberalism is unnatural. And my response to that is, you're right. And that's why it's so great, because the natural way of organizing things is with a paterfamilias, or a big man, or a strong man, or a Hammurabi, and everyone knows their place, and they're not allowed to leave their place, and that they are born into a caste, a class, a niche, a role, 10 generations of stable hands, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
And that's natural. What we have is unnatural, and that's why it takes work to protect it.
Exactly. What we have is the culmination of millennia of progress and struggle and development. Whenever I teach about liberalism and about the image of God, I say, well, here in Genesis already this idea, and then it develops, and St. Paul and Augustine and the church, and it continues to develop. And someone always asks, well, the church wasn't liberal, or ancient Israel wasn't liberal, and the papacy in the Middle Ages talking about the image of wasn't liberal. Yes, of course it wasn't liberal. What I say is that, caring for yourself, being egocentric, thinking that your group is superior to another group, thinking that it's legitimate to discriminate other people, that's the default. Right. That's the natural thing to do. That's humanity in its naturalness. For you not to do that, you need a process of development. So it's not that, Genesis says all humans were created in the image of God. It's not that people hear that idea and suddenly become liberal. And it's not if, John Locke writes what he writes in the 17th century, suddenly people say, wow, that's a great idea. Let's form a liberal democracy. No, it takes a lot of work and a lot of development. And of course, the right conditions. It's not always the conditions are there for this to develop. And yes, I totally agree. It's not the natural thing. It's something that demands continuous struggle and continuous work. And what we see today is that a lot of people don't want to do that work anymore. And that's why that's part of the reason we are in a crisis of the liberal order.
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. One of the things, though, you do here, so you talk about those institutions that were not liberal, and I agree they weren't liberal. Part of my argument is that liberal democracies need some modestly is important, illiberal institutions. The family is fundamentally illiberal. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean parents can do whatever they want to their children, right? There are
Right.
points at
Right.
which the state will intervene, but we give them
Yeah.
a lot of latitude, right? And I think every institution, with a very few exceptions, like maybe the military and prison and a couple others, you need the right of exit,
Hmm.
which is essential to any democracy and any liberal order.
Hmm.
But beyond that, the argument is made, and that's my own view, is that you need
Yeah.
institutions that form character that in an illiberal way. But the argument is made that liberalism has spread like a cancer cell, and we've been drawing down the phrases as very like our moral capital, our religious capital, right? What do you say to people who say that at the end of the day, liberal societies can sustain a certain amount of atheism, secularism, romanticism, nihilism, all of these kinds of
Hmm.
things, but it needs those essentially traditional religious Judeo-Christian institutions and cultures and norms to be dominant for it to endure. And when you draw down that capital, eventually the thing implodes. Where do you come
I
down
mean,
on that?
I totally agree, except for Judeo-Christian. I wouldn't say that you cannot have a liberal state, which is Hindu or
Mm-hmm.
Confucian or whatever. But I totally agree. And I mean, I actually wrote about it in my last book in Hebrew, which is about liberalism and the crisis of liberalism. I'm a liberal. I'm for the liberal order. I wish to strengthen the liberal order and to struggle against the enemies of the liberal order. But I'm aware enough to understand that liberalism doesn't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Liberalism cannot function alone. Liberalism is a framework. It's a sort of an agreement between community and the government. It's about rights. It's about limitation of power. It's about equality between us. It's about our autonomy. It's all these things, but it doesn't tell a story. And it doesn't tell me who I am, where I'm from, where I want to go. In fact, it can't tell those things because it wants me to have autonomy to define for
Right.
myself what I
Right.
believe in, what I don't, what I think is the proper life to live, the good life that I want to construct for myself. That's
Right.
liberalism. So it doesn't tell that story. And we need complementary institutions that tell these stories. So
Mm-hmm.
religion is one, and family is one, community, and even nationalism. We need like
Mm-hmm.
a national identity is something that complements liberalism and gives people some understanding of where they are, who their group is, who they're rooting for, who they are willing to sacrifice themselves even for
Right.
sometimes. All this is
What
super
your best
important.
traditions are, right? I mean, like, you can't understand what it means to be an American without understanding what your best traditions are. You can't
Yeah,
understand what it is to be an Israeli without or French or any of these things.
yeah,
And like, I'm a big critic of nationalism, but I've always said it's a poison that's determined by the dose, and you need
yeah.
a little
Yeah.
nationalism for social solidarity to hold a country together.
I actually think we're using the word nationalism in a different way. I simply meant the actual idea that we belong to a certain nation or
Yeah,
patriotism.
yeah,
I didn't mean like hyper.
nationism. Yeah,
Yeah, nationism.
yeah,
I think we need
yeah,
nationism. I think
yeah.
the fact that humanity is divided into different countries and states, that's good. That's good. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because it offers a very simple, straightforward identity to groups of people, and people need identity.
Mm-hmm.
Our sense of being someone related to some group is a very fundamental need for humans.
Right.
I get that some people see themselves as citizens of the world, and fine. But most people, that's not enough for them. Most people
Yeah.
need to be part of a certain group, and it can be a religious group, it can be club of some sort, but it can also be the nation state, which sometimes, in the case of Israel, has to have a lot of solidarity and a lot of mutual responsibility in order to survive, right? In order to really to simply survive, because people today, and we're talking, at a time of war in Israel, are sacrificing their lives
Yeah.
for the better the better of the republic, the better of their community, of their family. And all these are values that liberalism can hold and allow for, but it cannot give. And I definitely think you need this as a complement to the liberal order. But if you only have that, of course, if you only have nationism, which becomes nationalism, and hyper-nationalism without liberalism, that's it. You have
Totalitarian.
totalitarianism, you have
Yeah.
autocracy, and for you can have theocracy if you only have religion without liberalism and rights. Also, you got Iran, right? You don't want that.
Right.
So the liberal order is the framework, but definitely it needs other sources of values, ideals, and identity.
Right. I mean, the organicism stuff we were talking about earlier, that's, Mussolini's the guy who coins the word totalitarian, and he didn't necessarily mean it in the Orwellian evil sense. He meant everyone belongs, all the oars pull in the same direction, everyone's part of the organic whole. That sounds awesome until you have a different understanding of what the pursuit of happiness means, and then you're seen as a cancerous agent within the body politic, right?
Yeah.
That's my problem with populism and hypernationalism. I
Can I say both
yeah,
fascism and communism tried to revert to a more organic or solidarious
right.
sort of community in different ways. And both went against liberalism that they saw as fragmentary, as too individualistic, as too egocentric. So, you can even sympathize with what they wanted to do. They wanted an old-fashioned community that is
Right.
very solidarious, etc. But of course, trying to do this with force and trying to reshape the whole society in some force to some idea that you have in your mind, of course, doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my point, is that desire to be part of a tribe where we're all in it together, we're all fighting in
Yeah.
unison, that's natural. And that's how, and that people who want to go back to sort of natural forms of social organization, various forms of tribalism, they often call their isms something modern sounding, but in fact, they're all more reactionary than what liberalism was. The creation of this image of God thing is one of the only truly revolutionary things in human history. And, but I'd be just curious. I know we're running long, but I can rant about this stuff quite a bit. But one of the ways, because I agree with you that liberalism is only good at the things liberalism is good for, and that's it, right?
Yeah,
It's sort of
that's
like
right. That's right.
democracy is only
We need
democracy
to
is good for
acknowledge
the
the
things
limit.
democracy is good for, right?
Yeah.
And where democracy or liberalism aren't necessary, it's necessary not to have liberalism and democracy. And but I find Friedrich Hayek, who I'm a kind of a Hayek guy, his schema I find very, very useful, and it gets me to a question about Israel, which is that he talks about the microcosm versus the macrocosm, or the Gemeinschaft versus the Gesellschaft, and basically
Exactly.
his argument is, in a nutshell, that in the microcosm of friends, family, faith, community, neighbors, people you know by name, people who know you
Yeah.
by name as an individual, there's one set of rules, right? There's one set of everything's reciprocal. It's not financial. It's not contractual. It's about status and family and friendship and all of those sorts of things. If your uncle comes to your house in the middle of the night uninvited and knocks on the door and says, "My car broke down," you say, "Come on in, grab a couch." If a total stranger does, maybe
Yeah.
not, right? That's the microcosm. In the macrocosm, it's the extended order of liberty. It's the realm of contracts and commerce, and there are different rules there. And one of the things I like about the Gemeinschaft versus Gesellschaft argument is that Hayek recognizes that if you try to take the rules of the Gemeinschaft, of the personal,
Right.
and impose them on the entire society, that is going to be totalitarian. If you
Exactly.
try to run the entire society as a family, it's going to be totalitarian. If you try to take the rules of the extended order, of the commercial order, and you impose it on the family, you're going to destroy the family. And so
Right.
you need both. And what I find striking about this is that in the West right now, I mean, I think Denmark's doing pretty good, but pretty much Israel is the only society that feels like, I mean, put the Gaza and all the foreign policy and military stuff by the side for a moment. Prior to October 7th, let's say, and not
Yeah.
counting the Supreme Court controversy, Israel has high levels of social trust, has high levels of, of, of patriotism, high levels of fertility compared to the rest of the West. And it seems like Israel's the one country that kind of gets its Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft balance pretty
Yeah.
right. And I'm just kind of curious, A, do you agree? And B, what is your sort of short version explanation for that?
I agree. And I mean, Israel, has the highest levels of fertility in the West, etc. And there are a few reasons for that. One is actually a sad reason, because Israel is threatened, because this society feels that it's in a sort of a tension and always has to be on guard, and that already brings some sort of solidarity. It brings some sort of mutual responsibility. You know that you need the people around you in times of crisis, and crisis is going to come. So first that, but also it's a cultural thing. I mean, it's a Jewish state. Jews feel themselves as a part of a big family, the sons of Israel. Israel is, of course, Jacob, right? We are all descended from the same ancestral parents, and there's this sort of tribalness, which can be bad, which can be can be racist, can be discriminatory towards others, but also has its good sides, which is this fundamental solidarity and mutual trust and mutual recognition. Yeah. But and I will say, whatever you said before, just to the first part, you said that Hayek says that you shouldn't try to implement the laws of the Gemeinschaft on the Gesellschaft.
Mm-hmm.
That's another way of saying exactly what I said, that both fascism and
Right.
communism tried to make a Gemeinschaft of the whole state, and of
Right.
course that ends up in totalitarianism.
Yeah. I mean, the way I often explain it to audiences is, look, I'm a very capitalist guy. I'm a Hayek guy, right? So I'm a free market guy. In my family, I'm a communist,
Yeah.
right? It is like from each according to his ability, each according to his need, right? Like you don't
Right.
like
Right.
feed your good son better food than your bad son, right? Everyone shares equally. We don't charge our
Yeah.
children for food or clothing or these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But outside of my family, I'm a capitalist. And like you can maintain this tension. And I think that
Yeah.
tension, just to bring it home, it comes from this inherent tension inside Western civilization, which is, it's this funny argument. And I know I'm abusing my privileges with you, but
No,
there's a guy named
please.
Frank Meyer, who's a very important conservative intellectual. He was at National Review for a long time as the literary editor. He coined he didn't coin it. It was actually coined as an insult to him, but like he came up with the idea of this thing called fusionism. And it sort of defines Buckleyite conservatism, post-war conservatism. And the basic argument goes
Yeah.
like this, that virtue not freely chosen isn't virtuous. And so therefore you have to have a free society, because compelled virtue, even if the act is good, is not actually virtuous. It has to be voluntary, it has to be deliberate. And what Meyer did was develop this argument that this is not simply some sort of pat, cute syllogism. This is actually the inherent tension inside of Western civilization, of these trade-offs between freedom and order, liberty and virtue. And the whole point of Western civilization isn't that one is good and one is bad.
Right.
It's that each one is good until it gets bad, and then the other one has to come in and it's a little Hegelian, but we don't use
Yeah.
Hegel on here. And he has a lot of critics on this new right now who think that it was all nonsense, and that Western civilization is in fact all about order and Christian stuff. And it just, I think they misunderstand Meyer's point, and they misunderstand Western civilization.
No, I totally agree. I think it's always this trying to get this balance between freedom and value, or freedom and society, freedom and religion, rights and our close-knit, or however close it can get,
Sure.
society. And I don't think that balance can ever be struck in a final way.
Right.
It's an ongoing negotiation. It's an ongoing this dialogue, and that's what we're doing. I mean, now this wave of populism is trying to challenge what we had before, because for some people it didn't work. Not even economically. I think it didn't work in in a personal and identity wise way. I think the crisis of liberalism is first and foremost a crisis of identity. People
Mm-hmm.
were feeling too abstract, too not enough rooted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a part of the negotiation. I mean, I hope the damage is as least as it can get. But what we have now, this crisis in the liberal order, is another wave in which liberalism needs to adjust itself to a new era, to new people, to new generations, and the challenges that it faces are these trying to push in a different direction, more autocratic, perhaps, more religious, perhaps, more more nationalistic, and we as liberals need to rise up to the challenge and really and articulate a new balance that is fit for this era.
All right, Tomer Perisco, thank you so much for doing this. I could talk to you all day. Maybe I hope you'll come back. Um,
Thank
and
you. It was a pleasure, and I hope to so too.
It was great fun. Okay, Tomer Persico has left the studio. As you can imagine, longtime listeners, longtime readers of mine, people who've read Suicide of the West, you can tell how sort of in my wheelhouse this was, and how I resisted going in all sorts of directions that I could have gone. But I got a lot out of it. It's a wonderful book. It's a very helpful way of understand. Like uh, Persico made the point in the conversation that people put a lot of scorn on the phrase Judeo-Christian tradition or Judeo-Christian civilization. There are atheists who don't care about the Judeo or the Christian, and there are, I would say, a minority, a sizable, or a minority. Most Christians, I think, have no problem with the phrase Judeo-Christian civilization, but there are people who just want it to be Christian civilization. And this book is a great way of sort of teasing out why it really is Judeo-Christian civilization, and or Judeo-Christian culture or tradition or whatever it is, whatever label you want to use. But Christianity added new and vitally important elements in the process of scaling up a lot of Jewish morality. But that was what it was scaling up. Um, anyway, it's a very useful book. It's a very useful way to think about these things, and it gets at a lot of the stuff I've been talking about a lot on here, about the problems with taking this incredibly valuable and good tradition to extreme ends in the form of these cul-de-sacs like nihilism, atheism, and whatnot. Anyway, lots to chew on. I hope people enjoyed it. Lots of counter programming. Donald Trump didn't even come up once, nor did Zorhan Mandami, and that was a relief. So again, the book is called "In God's Image: How Western Civilization Was Shaped by a Revolutionary Idea." The official pub date is July 22. Really highly recommend it. You should get it if you're interested in these things, or if you think you might be interested in these things, but you just don't know enough about these things to decide this might be the right book for you. If you enjoyed Suicide of the West, or at least even aspects of it, I think you'll get a lot out of this. And besides this, Prosecco guy seems like a mensch, so I liked him, and I hope to have him back. So with that, I got a lot of crazy travel coming up. Partly vacation, partly I'm going to the Chautauqua Institution this week. I'm going to do a panel thing with my friend Jonathan Rausch, and I'm going to drive up there. And then I'm going on vacation the following week, but I'm going to try to record while gone. And hey, if we're having these big internal conversations about where to invest, where to cut back, where to sort of lean our comparative advantage and all of that. I was going over the podcast download numbers for not just the Remnant, but for all the podcasts. We're doing well. We're in a place where a lot of media companies would be very jealous to have our suite of podcasts with the numbers that they have, but we could do better. And it's important to do better in part because that keeps the lights on. And so if you're already a subscriber, great. If you're a subscriber to this podcast, great. If you have a podcast app and you can give us a good review or actually do the voodoo that you need to do so well in actually becoming a subscriber to the podcast, it's fine for you to still listen at the Dispatch, but there are things to like trick algorithms into bumping us up more, which then helps us get exposed to a wider audience. Your word of mouth is hugely important too. And the wider audience we have, the more sustainable our podcast operations are, and more sustainable the Dispatch is. There are lots of ways you can help. And, first of all, becoming a subscriber to the Dispatch is probably the most important one. But then, giving us a good review, going into the various apps and subscribing to this or to Advisory Opinions or the Dispatch podcast, that helps as well. And putting a good word out there just on the streets for us helps a lot. Because we'd like to get, to 100, 150,000 downloads per podcast. That's when you can start, really kicking in, some better revenue for ad sales. I'm being just honest with you guys about this. It doesn't mean we'll get more ads. It probably means you get less ads. But we will be able to charge more for the ads, which helps pay the bills. And so if you can help us out in any of this, go to our YouTube channels and subscribe to any of those. That helps with the algorithm too. I don't like living in a world of algorithms, but here we are. So with that, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Professor Persico. And again, his book is In God's Image, How Western Civilization Was Shaped by a Revolutionary Idea. And with that, I'll see you next time.
לא, אתה לא, זה הסכת.